Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on whereabouts you are in the world. It is wonderful to be able to present to you this afternoon, and we are going to be presenting this webinar on why standards matter and what they mean for you as a GAI member. Now, I'm delighted today to be joined by our speaker, Daniel Mansfield from BSI. So, Daniel, you are most welcome.
Thank you.
And we would also like to give thanks to the sponsor for this stream, and that is Abloy Security. So many thanks to those from Abloy for their generous sponsorship. Okay, just a little bit of detail on the speakers. So as I said, Daniel Mansfield. Daniel is the BSI Head of Policy Engagement. And in his role, he focuses on policy work relating to BSI's role as the UK's national standards body. And he'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by a national standards body. He also leads BSI's interactions with the UK quality infrastructure. So that's taking a look at standards and accreditation and metrology. So as I say, Daniel, we look forward to hearing from you in this webinar. Then a little bit about me, although anybody who has been on our webinars is probably sick of seeing me. I am the GAI Technical Manager and have been from 2014. And amongst some of my roles, I also represent industry and the Guild on the following committees. So I represent on SEN and BS standards, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. In addition to that, I'm the co-chair of Working Group 12, and that WG12 are the group that were created in the wake of the Grenfell Tower to look at competence in construction products, and that's a group that I co-chair. I'm also involved in other areas. So, for example, the Construction Leadership Council, the CLC, have a Brexit forum, and that enables us to be able to put our views and our thoughts straight through to representatives from government. So that's a little bit about us. I'm going to talk just a little about the learning aims. Once I've done that, I will disappear off your screen and then magically reappear in a little while and talk a little bit further. So the learning aims are as follows. We'll take a look at background information on BSI and who they are and on standards themselves. We'll take a look at how standards are made and the process. We'll then move on and be more specific in terms of what they mean for you as a GAI member. So our involvement in the standards process, then what this specifically means for you as a GAI member. And finally, we will give you some further sources of information, followed by a Q&A session. So I am going to, at this stage, pass on. And Daniel, over to you, and I look forward to picking up with you a little later on.
Thank you very much, Douglas, for that introduction. Hello again. I'm delighted to join you today. So thank you to GAI for the invitation. So I'm Head of Policy Engagement at BSI Group. BSI Group, we're a Royal Charter organisation, British Standards Institution, so that encompasses the activities of the national standards body that you can see on the left-hand side. This is where I work, so I work in a policy-facing department, so we do a lot of work with government, with key trade and professional bodies, which is why I'm here today talking to you. In the national standards body function are all the people that are sort of driving the engine room of standards, so the people coordinating all the committees. And then we have information solutions, so that means all the publishing and the getting the standards out there. There is another side to BSI that many of you will be aware of, which is an assessment and certification organisation, principally operating globally. The national standards body bit on the left-hand side, that is, if you like, a monopoly in the UK. There is only one national standards body, and I'll talk a bit more about that. The certification business and everything, that is a sort of a competitive environment. They're not the only certifiers in town, or in the world, and so there is a reason sort of we have a separation between the two functions. But just to move on, what does it mean to be the national standards body? Well, We are independent of government, but our work is in the national interest, and so MOU, there is a memorandum of understanding with the Department for Business, but on behalf of the whole of government, that recognises BSI's role as the national standards body. Our standards, the work we do, is stakeholder-led. It all basically comes from consensus and consultation. Without consensus, without committees, without the kind of committees that Douglas, he talked about what he sits on, and many of you do, we simply do not have the standards. Standards have the potential to deliver or support government policy sometimes, but always in accordance with BSI's own rules and principles. So we don't just do what the government tells us to do, but if there's there can be a policy relationship between standards and regulation. I'll talk a bit about that. For us, the reputation of what we do and the legitimacy of standards comes from this consensus way of working. And so all of our decisions, our business development, so we do make a surplus, but we reinvest it into the business. It always comes in the context, what is the national interest? There is also some government funding for what we do, but that's for specific purposes. If any of you have ever represented, for example, a BSI committee in work in SEN or ISO, there can sometimes be a small fund that contributes to the travel, for example, and that's provided by the government according to some very particular rules. But mostly we are self-supporting through sales of standards, through membership and that sort of thing. I talked about consensus, so that is what a standard is. It's a stakeholder-led solution to respond to defined needs, or a quicker way I like to say is an agreed way of doing something, or what good looks like. It's important to remember that BSI itself does not decide or set the content of standards, but we coordinate the UK-wide expert and stakeholder views. We exist for stakeholders right across the UK. We exist for industry, but also for government, consumers, environmental groups, all of these other groups. These are people that we need to be sitting around the table, or these days the virtual table, discussing the content of standards. They can cover absolutely anything. There's no boundaries set around what we can and cannot cover in standards. We just need a group of stakeholders to come together to agree. As I said in the last slide, they're voluntary, but they can underpin regulation and give confidence to markets and to governments. So a lot of you may be familiar with the kinds of standards that give a presumption of conformity to regulation, for example. So the standard is outside the regulation, but you use it to demonstrate your conformity. I think really importantly, and certainly post-Brexit, standards are a really important way of supporting and facilitating international trade through avoiding technical barriers. And standards are recognised by the World Trade Organization. I know WTO terms was a really newsworthy item during all the Brexit debates, but actually the World Trade Organization itself, it does recognise standards as a means of avoiding technical barriers to trade. And standards can also cover other aspects like promoting fair competition, involving consumer aspects. Standards written in the right way can also enable innovation and can enable good risk management. The pictures on this slide, well, the ones at the top, is sort of, if you like, well, it's how trade used to look. Barrels and tea chests and things like that, and of course the picture on the bottom is what trade looks like now. These are shipping containers, and this is really a standard story there. So there is a standard for an ISO standard for the shipping container itself, but as trade has become more international, standards have become more and more important to that story, and more important, and the more international standards are coming through, replacing, if you like, standards that used to be for the UK only, and we'll talk about that as well. So the UK influence, BSI, we can, as I said before, we convene the UK voice, but for our own stakeholders, this is also with regard to the international standards bodies. You may well have heard of SEN. There's an electrotechnical counterpart, SENELEC and ETSI. These are the three European standards organisations. And then we have ISO and IEC internationally. And if you like, BSI is SEN, BSI is ISO, in that we are the member. Our committees work on subject areas, and where relevant, those standards may be national only or European or international or a mix of all three. We're very proud of the sort of international leadership that we have, that we're in the top 6 membership in ISO and IEC. This means that we're involved in all of the governance of those bodies as well, and we have the leading number of participating memberships in those environments. In the last few years, we've also, with some Foreign and Commonwealth Office support, run a thing called the Commonwealth Standards Network. This is within the ISO system, but it's a grouping of the national standards bodies from Commonwealth countries, and that is 52 out of 54 Commonwealth countries are represented, and actually it's the 52 that actually have a national standards body. The other 2 are so small they don't have one, as far as I understand it. You may have heard the graphic just on the bottom right there, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We're doing a lot of work to show the relationship of standards and the relevance of standards to delivering those goals. And in this international work, yes, as we say, the more that standards can be international, the better, because this drives trade. But also, occasionally, we might be looking at bilateral collaboration in areas where there might be some focus just perhaps between 2 countries on a standard, where we try something first and then look to promote it as an international standard. So all of these things are open to us, and it's important for us that we interface where relevant with all of those bodies. Now, there's a lot of words on this slide, and I am not proposing to read them all out. You'll be glad to hear, but this is just to show all of the different types of standard. A lot of people hear standard, and I think they think the top row, a specification, a standard that's written as shall, because these are the standards that have the verifiable requirements. There is nowhere in a standard that requires a third-party test or a third-party verification, but a standard that's written as a specification is capable of that third-party verification. For example, if the market requires it or if the government requires it. But standards can also cover things like test methods or a method of specifying. Vocabulary, this has been really important to us, I think, in some innovative areas where the first thing you do is agree terms before you can do anything else. Classification is a related concept, but then we also have guidance and codes of practice as well. So these are both written as should, so they're less firm than a specification. But they can be important in certain contexts. So just really to show you that a standard can be about any subject, and it can be at any level, from a really hard and fast verifiable requirement all the way through to guidance and vocabularies. And consent how standards are made. That material. I don't particularly need to walk you through it piece by piece, but this just shows you that anyone can suggest an idea for a new standard. We actually have a place on our website where anyone can suggest something. Usually the suggestions for standards do come from our existing committee base, because they know their subject area and they may well know where the gaps are. But we have a method for assessing ideas for standards and approving them. If it's in an area that belongs to an existing committee, then the parent group will approve that. If it's a brand new area, then we have a board level committee called the Standards Policy and Strategy Committee, which approves new subject areas. There's then a process of drafting, public consultation. This is when anybody we put them on our website, anyone can comment. The committee has a duty to consider all of the comments. It doesn't have to agree with them all. But then an updated draft is issued and there may well be a final approval stage and then publication. But then crucially, all standards have to be reviewed usually at least every 5 years. So this way we keep the landscape of standards fresh. I think sometimes people might complain that standards are a bit slow, but it can take a while to go through all these steps of consensus. But then, and then having done that, we don't just breathe a sigh of relief and then that's it, our work is done. We know that we have to review them every 5 years, and there may well be amendments and things that come along in between as well, just that we have to take into account, maybe to pick up an error, or sometimes if something has moved on in an industry, we might need to make that change. So this is another way of sort of putting those stages of standard development from acceptance to draft to public comment and approval. Although we're a standards body, we haven't quite managed to standardise the terminology that's used from what we use domestically in BSI compared with what's used to say in ISO internationally or CEN in Europe. One thing I didn't say when I was on that slide about ISO and IEC and CEN and CENELEC, it's worth noting that the European standards bodies are not EU bodies. Their membership is wider, just remember that. But anyway, the terminology does differ, but the stages are broadly the same. And just, there we are. Standards are made in committees, so we have some 1,200 technical committees with around 13,000 experts, committee members representing industry, as I said, or largely trade bodies, but also government, academia, test houses, certifiers. We have a consumer network as well. There's a current catalogue of some 40,000 standards, and over 85% are of international and European origin. So, and the reason we do this is because this is what our stakeholders need. You know, we don't just, it's not just Little Britain in the standards world. We are aware that we operate in a global context. There are global trade lines, and people need to operate on a level that's more than just the UK. In terms of, there are some stats here, and I think, Douglas, we're going to make these slides available to you afterwards, because you might find some useful, there are some stats here that just show that in terms of ISO, IEC, CEN and CENELEC, so ISO and CEN are, well, it's worth saying IEC and CENELEC are electrotechnical, ISO and CEN are everything else. For all of these, we're among the top 6 countries in terms of providing the secretariats. This is about taking a share of the work that we do and sort of doing our fair share of the work. We have a principle of international first where possible, and so European standards tend to be developed for uniquely European needs. In the construction products area, we're aware that this is actually more than in some other sectors because of just the way that the markets work. And so if we look at the national catalogue of British standards, just over half are in international origin or identical between international and European. Another third are European only, and then about 15% are of national origin. Stakeholder representation is really important. I've just got a couple more minutes and then I will hand you over to Douglas, but stakeholder representation is really important to us in terms of our committees. We have a foundational standard, BS0. It's being revised at the minute, actually, a standard for standards, but we have a requirement for balanced representation on our committees. What this looks like, well, standards makers, these are the committee members, they really can come from anywhere, and there's a standing duty on all committees and all of the staff running them to make sure that it continues to be, we continue to be relevant, and that we have made all efforts to involve everybody that we can. I mentioned that we have a consumer public interest network, which this year is celebrating its 70th birthday. It operates as a separate network of expertise on committees that are presenting the end user view for standards. So these are not people that will use the standards, but these are people who may well be affected by the product on the standards. And we have a network now with over 60 representatives. They set their own priorities. We just provide the secretariat, and they participate in the committees that they see as relevant. And we think this is a really important part of demonstrating the relevance of the relevance of standards through having the biggest breadth of stakeholder involvement possible. We also have, just very quickly to finish, some fast track standards. You may have heard of PAS. These are sponsored standards. Often government sponsors something. They're limited time things. They typically last for about 2 years before they are reviewed, but they can be a way for government to promote policy. And then we have a new stream that's come through in the last year, Flex, which operates a bit like software sprints. So people get involved very intensively. All the drafts are put online. We've done this for things like connected and autonomous vehicles, but interestingly, in the last year, we did it also for COVID-safe working guidelines, which have now been taken up by ISO. It's all underpinned by consensus, but by their nature, these are, if you like, a more limited, a more curated consensus process, but they can become British standards. Happy to answer more questions about them at the end if you need to, but just to sort of say that these are part of that landscape. And then I hand over to Douglas.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Daniel. That was fascinating, and even for someone like myself who's greatly involved in the standards process, there's every day's a school day, and so we can all learn something. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the GAI involvement in the standards process, and as it says in this slide, we in the GAI are at the heart of the standards making process for your industry. So if we go into BSI, at the moment we currently participate in 24 BSI committees and drafting panels across a number of key areas. Now thankfully that's not 24 all at the one time, although there are times when it does feel like that. But we do have involvement in some of the panels. So, the committees. So you have committees who oversee a number of standards. And then we're also involved in drafting panels itself who would actually get down into the nitty gritty of either making or revising the standard. So there's two key ones here I want to talk about. There's the doors and windows group and there's the hardware group. And they really retain ownership of the particular standards within their own area. We would normally meet, it could be 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, depending what's on the agenda, to take a look at the standards which are being changed or any issues which relate to those areas. We also are involved in accessibility, B559, and security of buildings, B562. Now, accessibility you would be aware of, for example, through the likes of the BSI 300 1 and 2 codes of practice, and Daniel did mention earlier about a code of practice, which is a particular type of standard. So BSI 300 Part 1 and 2, the code of practice relating to accessibility. We're also involved in automatic power and pedestrian doors in MHE 31, and in relation to fire precautions in buildings, FSH 14, and fire resistance test for doors. And that's only just a few of them, but there's some of the sort of more weighty, heavier committees that we're involved in. So those are the committees. And then if I move on to the drafting panels themselves. So this is really the working group who come together to decide together through this consensus mechanism, which Daniel talked about, in terms of how the standard is created. So for example, there's one that I'm on at the moment, BS 9991, which is fire safety in the design, management and use of residential buildings. And that's another code of practice. That is a massive code of practice, which takes a look across the whole of the sector. We're only involved in one area, obviously, in terms of ironmongery and doors, although I am also involved in terms of as a liaison with the accessibility group for B559. But it means that we are sitting there and we are listening out to hear what is going to be said in this standard, and we are putting forward your thoughts. There are other ones as well which relate to product. So, for example, BS 8607 was a new standard that was created for mechanically operated push-button locks. BS 8214 for timber-based fire door assemblies. And that code of practice is going to be revised as well. And there will be, because of this 5-year review process, that is something that we will be looking at. BS 3621, I'm sure you're all aware of that, with regards to lock assemblies and with regards to security. PAS 24, enhanced security performance requirements for door sets. And very recently, we were involved in a PAS standard relating to BIM, and that was in relation to construction data dictionaries due to the work that we've been doing in product data template creation. So those are some of the standards there that we've been involved in over the past few years, although there would have been others as well. I wanted to make particular reference to a case study. So you may be aware of BS 8613-2017, and that's finger protection devices for pedestrian doors. And that's a specification, and it's safety requirements and test methods. So it's more full of shalls and less full of shoulds. And that's very important when it comes down to the wording in a standard. Now, prior to my involvement in the Guild, before I came on board as technical manager, my predecessor, Jackie Sinclair, who many of you would have known, was involved in the early days at helping to put together a business case. So there was a requirement that was recognised for a new standard. There was a European standard for finger protection devices, but it was only for consumer devices. It wasn't for anything that was going to be used in terms of on public buildings. And because this was required in public buildings, there was then work that was done with the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents, taking a look at other stakeholders as well. And a business case was put together that the standard was required. And this was accepted by BSI, and that started the ball rolling. I was involved in this, and I then chaired the drafting panel for the standard, which was an interesting crash course, particularly looking at consensus and how to bring people along, not down to unanimity, but down to consensus, to this sort of lack of sustained opposition, to try and do our very best to ensure that everybody is in the one place as best we can. The result of our involvement in this is we now have a standard which is being used by industry to help ensure finger trap protection in commercial projects is robust and has a recognised detailed methodology of testing. And that's particularly important, as we say, for commercial projects and, for example, with relation to EN 16005, where there's a mandatory requirement for finger trap protection so that the finger protection is robust, something that can be tested. The result is we have a better specification of higher quality product. There's a standard that it can be tested to, and we are aware that manufacturers are actively testing to this standard. If we move on to another case study, and Daniel mentioned earlier about another type of standard, the BSI Flex. Well, BSI Flex 8670 version 3 is for the built environment core criteria for building safety and competence frameworks. You would have heard earlier on today this talk about the drive towards increased competency in the construction industry, and a lot of that's being driven through the Hackett Review following the tragedy of the Grenfell Tower disaster. So there's a new code of practice has been developed, which is now publicly available onto the BSI website, and it's actually free of charge because it was sponsored by the government. Now, we in the GAI made you aware of the standard. Yes, we did, because I know, because I wrote it. I put it down in our stop presses. I put it down in our newsletters, made you aware that it was available for public comment. We also gave early comment on the creation of the standard through the works that I've been doing in Working Group 12 for Competence in Construction Products that I mentioned earlier. And that is this competency committee, which I'm currently co-chairing. There will be another set of competence standards which are being put together. There's going to be principal contractor, principal designer, and building safety manager. Now, we will be representing the Flex competence standard for principal designers. I will be on the drafting panel for this, and that will mean that I will be in representation of the construction products industry and, of course, by extension, our industry. What does that mean? Well, that will help ensure that the appropriate specification of product by those who are competent and qualified to do so will be at the heart of competence standards for the construction industry going forward. And we in the GAI are the voice, your voice in this process. Now, it was mentioned before about CEN. So CEN is the Comité Européen de Normalisation, so the European Standardization Committee. And at the moment, we currently participate in 3 European committees in which I would sit as was some of the UK experts. So, for example, CEN TC33, WG4, TG1. Yes, there's a lot of words and letters in that. But that is to provide a new European standard for product category rules for building hardware for environmental product declarations. And there is a standard PREN, which means it's a pre-Euro norm, pre-standard, 17610, which is due to be published later on this year. And we were involved in the creation of that through the work we're doing through representing the UK on that. Again, providing the voice for you in our industry. Another one, TG7. So many of you will know the standard EN 1906. Well, again, this is the task group TG7 responsible for that standard. And I've been representing the UK on that for a number of years since I joined the Guild. And then WG9, which is for powered pedestrian doors. So I work alongside two of our colleagues in the Automatic Door Suppliers Association, and this is for the creation of or revision of standards in this arena. So, for example, there is a new European standard that was published this year for powered pedestrian swing door drives, not a mandatory, but a voluntary standard. 16005, many of you will know, powered pedestrian doors set safety in use. That is a harmonized standard under the Machinery Directive, and that is one which is currently being developed and again is due to be published later this year. And then there's another standard as well, 17352, for power-operated pedestrian entrance control equipment. Now, whenever those European standards are published in the UK, they become BSEN standards, coming under the National Standards Catalogue and are available through BSI. And through SEN membership, that means that the standards are involved, or the standards are published with a BS, and any conflicting national standards then must be withdrawn. Now, this section here is really important, what it means for you as a GAI member. So what do? We listen to your voice. We make your voice and opinions heard. We communicate with you. We provide you with the opportunity to comment. We educate you. And we support your business. So how do we do this? We listen to your voice. You keep us informed on your views through a number of means. Through the GAI technical helpline, which I look after in terms of by email or by phone. Through member communication, so we're always listening to what you have to say. Through branch meetings, which unfortunately have been suspended, but we will look to reinstate all being well from September. And through the GAI Technical Committee. This is a group who meet quarterly to discuss and debate the major technical issues which face our industry. And the committee members bring a range of experience, including professionals from hardware manufacturers, architectural ironmongers, testing laboratories, meaning that, again, there's a wide voice that is heard. We make that voice heard at the right level. So, as I mentioned before, our participation in committees provides you, our members, with a voice and an influence in the different levels of standards mentioned. The BSI flexes, the PAS standards, the BS standards, and the SEN standards. And then, of course, we communicate with you. Yes, we do, because from the extra insight that we have in these standards bodies, we continually make you aware of what is happening through the likes of our regular webinars. For example, the one last week on UKCA marking. Through CPD presentations in branch when allowed to do so. Through the Architectural Ironmongery Journal, there's a technical article that is written each quarter. Through quarterly technical reviews, which will update what is happening on at the start of each season. Our guides to standards. And again, we update those every year with new titles, and there will be one on 1527, which will be coming out next month on sliding door gear, and our specifiers guides, all available on the website. We provide you with the opportunity to comment. So, as mentioned earlier, it is possible to comment, provide comment through the DPC, the draft public comment. We will tell you when those gateways are available through stop presses or through the monthly newsletters. Listen out, keep an eye out, because those are really important that your voice is heard through those. We educate you. All, of course, our courses are based on standards. Foundation and Hardware gives an early introduction. DIP GAI, that's our industry recognised symbol of professionalism, and the knowledge and application of standards is provided throughout this entire course. In fact, there is a manual which is rewritten each year with any changes that have happened. GAI, we assist you to stay up to date with the latest standards and legislation through the CPD programme and the fire door inspection scheme co-owned by the BWF. Again, standards are taught throughout. So we support your business. We help you influence the creation and revision of standards. We prepare your business for any upcoming changes, either from manufacturer or specification. We keep you up to date on that. We use standards to make your offer more commercially viable. You can stay fully up to date with the state-of-the-art knowledge and build this into your specifications. When you know there's a standard coming, that can be built in. And of course, to stay protected. The correct use of standards can be a very useful defence in court if ever challenged. And of course, in doing this, you can stay one step ahead of your competitors when you know what's happening. Some further sources of information are on the screen: the GAI website, the BSI website, and the SEN website. And we have a few moments left, so I'm just going to move on to questions now. So I believe Rachel, my colleague, is with us. Rachel, have we any questions in the last 4 or 5 minutes? Hiya.
Yeah, we've been quite busy on this subject, and thanks to you both. I'll start with the first question. Will BSI still be part of SEN now that UK is out of Europe?
Daniel, can I leave you that one?
Yeah, I can take that. And the short answer is yes. I know I said belatedly that in my presentation that so SEN and the other European standards bodies are not EU organisations. They're independent, established under Belgian law, and BSI is their constituent member. All of them, they're effectively co-owned by their members. There is some negotiation going on at the minute around categories of membership because there are particular issues around votes. So particularly sometimes with the final vote on a European standard, if it is a harmonised standard and it relates to community law, then there can be some technicalities there when perhaps not all only the EU, so the EU 27 members will vote, or EU plus EEA, depending on if that law is also applying beyond the EU. But the simple message is yes, because our stakeholders want us to, because our experts still want to use those standards, they still need to use those standards, and so yeah. There's more on the BSI website. Actually, if you look at bsigroup.com/Brexit, there is a lot there. Have a look at that.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Anything else, Rachel?
Very good. Yeah, so would you create a standard for intermittence? Iron protection. So we're talking about, I think the question is probably about intermittent seals, maybe intermittent pads for hinges.
We could. Again, it would be down to a business case. Wouldn't that be correct, Daniel? So if there was a business case, right, and it was felt that there was a need for a standardization of this item, be it for the seal, for the protection, then that's something that, and if anybody's interested in doing that, if they want to contact me on technical@gai.org.uk, and if it's something that they feel that there is enough of a need for or desire, a business case can be created, a panel can be created, and we can take a look at that. Does that sound right, Daniel?
It does. All we need is a group of people to get around and sort of, we need something that enough people can reach consensus on, really, and that's it.
Yep. Yep. So yes, we're always all ears on that. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. What happens if a BSI committee cannot agree on something unanimously?
I'll leave you on that, Daniel. I've had to deal with that as well.
Well, I was very pleased when you spoke, Douglas, that you talked about consensus not being unanimity, but rather the absence of sustained opposition. And, you know, I've been at BSI for a long time, and I used to be on the secretariat side running committees. And if you can't reach consensus, sometimes you can find a way through. Sometimes it is a bit negative. It feels like it's the can you live with it principle. You know, can we all agree that the world is a better place with the standard than without? So what you really need to do is test where that resistance is coming from. If someone why is someone digging their heels in? And usually you can find a way through to sort of avoid that, so that you achieve an absence of sustained opposition, and then you have consensus. It doesn't mean we're all deliriously happy, but it does mean we can live with it.
Excellent. I think we're
Thank you.
probably very
We've
nearly
got just
there.
perhaps one
30
quick
seconds
question.
maybe. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So do you think harmonised standards work, or does different interpretation add or create confusion in our markets?
I think that's
Do you
probably
have
longer than we would have time for.
Okay,
Harmonized standards work. Do they work well in Europe at the moment? They probably there is so many issues at the moment that are being caused by that. So at the moment, I would say a huge amount of difficulty in that, but probably leave it there. I will say, just to wrap up, just to close, we would really like to, as much as we'd like to have more questions, unfortunately we've run out of time. So just to sort of wrap up, thanks to Daniel and thanks to Abloy for sponsoring the session. So we're going to have a 15-minute break now, which is sponsored by EMB Solutions. And after that, we're going to go across into your product showcases. So please ensure that you've signed up for your chosen sessions. If not, head over now to the agenda tab, sign up there before it's too late. And during the break, you can also visit the sponsor expo and continue to network with fellow members and speakers by connecting in the people page. Listen, it has been brilliant to be able to talk to you. Daniel, it has been a pleasure having you as our guest speaker, and we would really like to thank you for giving up your time. The
anytime?
relationship
Thanks for having me.
the relationship between the GAI and BSI is certainly something that's very important to us, and we're certainly very glad of your assistance and support. So I
Thank
think
you.
that's probably me now, and I'll sign off and say thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Bye for now.
thank you
afternoon.
both.